welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we are discussing everything about A Scandal in Bohemia by Arthur Conan Doyle.
So the terrible summary for this one is essentially probably the worst adapted Sherlock Holmes short story of all time. By which I mean the short story whose original content varies so very wildly from every single way it's been adapted, with the potential exception of the Jeremy Brett adaptations.
It's not even in the same ballpark. It's not even in the same universe. I don't think I've seen a single adaptation where I was like, ah yes, all the key points of the actual story available for us. Just never. Where did this femme fatale come from? I'm so confused.
I think the only adaptation that I have seen that has Ireen Adler and also her husband, Godfrey Norton, who is also a major part of the plot, is probably the Jeremy Brett ones.
Well, she can't have a husband and be a femme fatale. That just ruins the entire image.
Well, she can't be hopelessly in love with Sherlock and have a husband that she also loves very dearly and badly wants to get married to, right?
Yeah.
So the plot summary of this short story, which really is quite short, is that the hereditary king of Bohemia, which is not a real thing actually, comes to Sherlock Holmes and says, look, I had a girlfriend and there's a photograph of the two of us together, which it's not made clear in what way these two people are portrayed in this photograph. It's just a photograph of that contains both of them, that the King of Bohemia does not want getting out because it will compromise his upcoming political marriage to a different member of the royal family.
So first, can I just say I love that revenge porn was a concept for Victorians also.
That is a very good point.
Well, here's the thing. In the book, in the story, I don't think it's made clear that Ireen Adler does want to use this as revenge porn.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think she actually did.
He's just assuming that.
So, like, the prince is all like, oh, she threatened to go public and it would ruin my marriage. And the way she portrays it is very much, this is something I need for protection from a powerful man who doesn't like me very much.
Exactly, and
very different.
So the King of Bohemia comes to Sherlock Holmes and says, look, you need to help me get this photograph back because she's going to ruin my upcoming political marriage. And Sherlock Holmes says, well, you're rich, so you'll pay me loads of money to do this, and you know what, I've been fancying a new pipe, stocking up on cocaine, whatever. And he says, yes, by all means I will do this for you. And so he goes to investigate Ireen Adler and sort of find out about her life and who she is, and basically discovers that she just wants to get married to her fiancé and like live a quiet life, and she's actually a very nice person. And in the course of trying to retrieve this photograph, she clocks him. She figures out he tips her off by accident, and she flees the country with her freshly married husband and the photograph, and says, look, you don't got to worry about me blackmailing the king. I just want to be left alone. God.
Yeah.
And, she outsmarted him, and that doesn't happen very often to Sherlock Holmes, and that is the basis of his regard for her.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can we talk about that? Can we talk about the outsmarting? Because I don't think she was even trying. I genuinely don't think she was even trying. If you read it as, like, she hasn't threatened the king at all, she's literally just using it for protection until she can marry her husband and disappear, which does seem to have always been part of the plan.
And it's a very logical protection.
Well, I don't know that she'd been intending to disappear.
Huh?
She just wants the quiet life. She's a retired opera singer who just wants to, marry her nice, boring lawyer husband and, settle down.
But basically all she does is continue with that plan.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes does not, thwart her. He doesn't figure into her plans in any way. She's just like...
He's an amusing diversion that happens to her.
Yeah, she's got her own life.
Yeah, she's like, I'm just going to go check this guy out disguised as a man real quick. Also, this is another thing I love. Can I just say that Watson, bless him, what a sweetheart, spends a huge chunk of this story going, Sherlock Holmes' amazing power of disguise. Even I should hardly have known him, the product of meticulous work, and blah, 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 blah. And Ireen Adler literally walks up to him dressed as a man, says hi, and walks off, and he just goes, she seemed vaguely familiar.
Yeah.
She's not even trying. Like, the master of disguise, and she's just like, I put on some trousers, and you immediately didn't recognise me. What up?
Yeah, and it's just like, she's been sort of not denigrated exactly, but her past as an actress and an opera singer is viewed unfavorably because it's, you know, sort of a lower class thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not something that genteel ladies do.
Mm.
But these skills very obviously help her out,
Yeah.
you know, and she's going, well, I'm an actress, and disguise is no stranger to me, so I, you know, donned the clothes of a man and tailed you back to your house where you were gloating about having got one over on me.
Yeah.
So I went back to my house and undid the one over on me that you did.
I really think we have to consider the possibility that any woman with a smidge of Amdram experience could outwit Sherlock Holmes. I think that might be the point of this story.
I was going to say, like, when he comes out in his costume and he like returns in this new character, my first thought was in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, where Jake and his friend like come out in their costumes and they're like, explaining this backstory to this character, and it just feels like exactly the same thing when he's coming to explain his costume and he's like a little clergyman, which made me laugh.
Yeah.
I love that he's a clergyman as well, because I knew that because I've seen Adaptations, but I missed it on the reread of the story.
I think that's the only thing the BBC Sherlock keeps, is that he's pretending briefly to be a priest. Also, there's a spider under my tiny desk and it's coming towards
your
me.
friend.
Oh no, teaching my spider to read. That's really simple. But in Ireen Adler's letter that she leaves behind in her ransacked house for Sherlock and the king to find after she's, you know, fled.
Yeah.
She's saying, oh, you know, you did very well, Sherlock, actually. You almost caught me. But, and part of why she says she was almost taken in was because she didn't have it in her to believe harm of somebody dressed as a clergyman.
That's
it's like,
really sweet.
She's just a nice person who, you know, upon seeing a kerfuffle break out outside her house and somebody get injured, which this is all staged by Sherlock in order to gain entry to her house to try and figure out where she's hiding this photograph. Upon seeing this, she just absolutely does as he expects and takes the ostensibly wounded, because it's all stage makeup that Sherlock's using, this wounded, parson into her house and tends to him very kindly. And he's just completely abusing her good nature on behalf of his client, who actually turns out to be kind of a dick.
Like, they throw a smoke bomb through her window.
Yeah.
It is a bit weird, like when... So I've highlighted something, it just basically says, after all, I thought, we are not injuring her, we are but preventing her from injuring another. Yet they're already assuming that she is going to blackmail the king. Like, there's quite a level of assumption that she will do something bad, when in fact, she's, like you say, she's just using it for her own protection. In the future, she might require this. It's a completely logical thing for her to do.
Yeah. And it really struck me when the king was explaining the case that for motive, all he had essentially was that this bitch be cray, actually.
Well, I think he thinks she's still in love with him.
It was literally just, she's morbidly obsessed with me. It's really embarrassing. She just can't bear to let me be happy with somebody else. And have you ever heard a more self-centered, arrogant piece of bullshit in your life?
It's so self-centered.
I love the end of the story when, you know, this, the dust is settling and it's become clear that she has outwitted Sherlock Holmes and has, you know, made off with her husband to parts unknown to go off and be happy. And the king is sort of going, oh, if only she had been on my level, what a fine queen she would have made. You know, isn't it a shame that she wasn't of my station? And Holmes looks at him and goes very coldly, like, yes, it does seem that this lady is on quite a different level to you. And it's like, the shade.
And the king doesn't even notice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's just so in his own little world that this level of privilege, he just expects everyone to sort of love him.
Yeah. And he can afford to be amused by it. That's another thing. He can afford to be amused by the fact that she's outwitted him. Whereas for her, it's very much a question of, I need to pull this off in order to have a normal life with my normal lawyer husband. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the stakes for her are so much higher. And he can just afford to be like, oh, this is hilarious. What a good woman she actually is. Ho, ho, ho. I haven't been terrorizing her at all. And it's like, buddy.
It is so weird how it's like you've been stalking this woman and then you just randomly turn up at her wedding, and then you randomly stalk her house dressed as a vicar, and nobody thinks it's slightly odd. Like, obviously in the that's reading it from a context of today, like, people thinking it's very weird. I mean, the other thing that made me laugh though was, like, completely unrelated, was just the fact how willing Watson is just going, well, you're going to commit crime. Sure, I'll come along. I might lose my medical license, but hey, I don't care. This will be a laugh.
Yeah. let's talk about Watson for a minute.
It's so... Also, you have a wife and potentially a child. I'm not sure, I haven't read any of the other stories, but, like, you're just...
I think just a wife at this point.
But, you have somebody who is, dependent on you to have your job, and you're just going, well, I'm going to go and commit some crime, so yay.
See, it's funny. I kind of read the whole, the sort of introduction of the two separate big relationships in Watson's life kind of differently, and that my brain was just fixated on the idea that, after he got married, he just stopped talking to Sherlock. It's been 2 months, and he has no idea what his friend is up to, and I'm just like, okay, I get that, your marriage is important to you, but, you're allowed to have friends.
Yeah.
Right? Does Victorian friendship work differently? Are you allowed to just fall out of touch for 2 months and just be like, yeah, this is fine?
I was going to say, in that first, the second paragraph, he just says, my marriage had drifted us away, my own complete happiness and my home-centered interests. I'm like, you can still have activities outside of your marriage. I'm pretty sure most stable relationships nowadays would go, yes, you do need to have a hobby outside of your home for sanity purposes.
His hobby is throwing smoke bombs through innocent opera singers' windows.
But should that really be Sherlock Holmes that you go
Probably
to
not.
for your sanity? I mean, I do like that take on the Holmes and Watson relationship where Watson's got to be a bit of an oddball too, right? In order to put up with Sherlock. He isn't quite average and normal and healthy.
No.
And that is something that I think that, and not necessarily that was very explicit in the BBC adaptation, but something I quite liked about the fandom before it became really just bizarre and toxic, was that interpretation was quite common and acknowledged within the fan base. And I think it makes for some really interesting dynamics where you can say, actually, these two people do complement each other, and it's not just this sort of poor normal man tagging along at the heels of this brilliant
Genius.
sort of distant genius. Yeah.
People talk about, and we'll probably read Artemis Fowl for this at some point, but there was a post on Tumblr that was talking about how everybody acts like Artemis Fowl's bodyguard is the really sensible one, and he's really just mature and straightforward and honest, and it's we are talking about a man who helped a 12-year-old kidnap a leprechaun.
But the bar is low.
And who dresses up in a suit of armour, who at one point in the series pretends to be a ghost. But it's just in comparison.
Yeah, Watson is this sort of normal, grounded, oh, he's an army vet, or he's a doctor. And there's an exchange in The Scandal in Bohemia where Holmes says to him, oh, do you mind breaking the law? And Watson goes, not at all. It's do you mind the possibility of arrest? And Watson goes, well, not if it's in a good cause. And it's just that's admirable, but it's not normal, right?
Yeah, he's a weirdo. Oh, speaking of Watson being weird, can I draw attention to a tiny detail at the beginning in which Sherlock deduces that Watson has been returned to practice as a doctor, and Watson is like, go on, tell me how you did it. And Sherlock Holmes mentions that one of the clues is that there was a slight bulge in Watson's hat where he'd been keeping his stethoscope, and why? Why is the stethoscope in the hat?
I mean,
somebody explain.
Where do you keep your stethoscope?
In a bag. In a bag, like a sensible person with the rest of my non-existent medical supplies.
What could be so important that you keep it in your hat instead of your stethoscope?
I mean, I think it's an excellent pocket. Bulky items, just stuff it in a top hat. I mean, what's not to lose?
I tell you what bugs me about this, right, is I have no idea how normal this is.
I wish it was normal.
Do Victorian gentlemen just keep things in their hat? Is that standard? Or is it just Watson being a weirdo?
Are they like Paddington Bear with their marmalade sandwiches in their top hat? I'm just going to have this image now. Everyone with a top hat has some marmalade sandwiches in their top hat. It's not proven, but I wish it were true.
I was going to ask you guys, what do you think is the weirdest thing you could possibly keep in your top hat? But I think Lottie has hit the nail on the head because it's sticky. It's a snack. You want a snack on you. I get that. But it's a sandwich. And not only is it a sandwich, it's a marmalade sandwich. It's the stickiest form of sandwich.
I think Marmite would be worse.
Ooh, interesting. Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, any kind of sandwich, I feel it's probably a poor choice to have on top of your head. I just can't see how that's comfortable.
And they got a little drinking flask.
Full BLT.
A small hamster.
A small hamster and a hamster wheel.
See, this reminds me of the Duckman from Discworld.
You open a little compartment in the front of your top hat and there's just a bird inside.
Yeah, like a cuckoo cuckoo clock, he just pops out and you feed him and he goes back in.
Like, hello.
Exactly.
It's Radagast. We've just reinvented Radagast from First Principles.
Oh my god, that is so true.
I was about to say that. Yeah.
I was going to say, when he is explaining how he deduced it, it's just going, well, it's so obvious. And then just goes on this such long ramble. And then Watson said, oh my gosh, I would have recognised that if I had that thought. But Sherlock goes, no, you don't have that thought. And it's just kind of...
It's such a burn.
It's just like, burn.
It reminded me of I had an art teacher who used to, when you complained about modern art and be like, oh, anybody could do that, she'd go, but you didn't. And that's basically Sherlock Holmes' whole vibe in that scene. It's just like... Also, I didn't realise how many of the, like, iconic lines were from this story. Like, things like, you see but you do not observe, and the facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. I didn't realise those were both from this one. That was cool.
I was going to say, like, I guess going on to Sherlock adaptations.
Time to scream.
So, as I've said, the Jeremy Brett one, I think, is probably the most faithful to the original story, and I think that's quite true of that entire series of the adaptation as a whole. That's probably the most sort of just direct to TV port of the stories is the Jeremy Brett series.
Yeah.
But then obviously in recent years we've had both BBC Sherlock and Elementary as modernised Holmes adaptations, and they treat the story of Ireen Adler, or the character I should say, in very different ways.
Yeah. I mean, Guy Ritchie, let us not forget the
Of
glory
course.
that is the Guy Ritchie movie.
Of course, the films.
I always forget that those are meant to be Sherlock Holmes adaptations because while they are great films with great soundtracks,
Yeah.
I don't think of them as Sherlock Holmes adaptations.
That's completely fair.
They're using the same IP, intellectual property, but they're not the same stories.
It's basically fan fiction. It's like we've taken the characters and we've done our own thing with it, but...
It's like we took all these stories and lots of these motifs, put them in a blender and fed it to Guy Ritchie.
Basically.
And here's what came out. Yeah, they're great fun. And obviously in those, Irene Adler is played by Rachel McAdams.
Yeah. So I can't criticise this adaptation because I'm just too gay.
Yeah, she is very, very good as Irene Adler, but it is a very classic version of the phenomenon where her character is interpreted as being romantic with Holmes, being some kind of the one that got away. They sort of are that for each other in those adaptations.
Like a professional Black Widow, almost. Like, you definitely get the hint that she's been married multiple times and her husbands keep dying in mysterious circumstances.
And she turns up to the funerals in really, really beautiful sort of black clothing or something.
And she turns up to everything in really, really beautiful outfits. It's true.
That's a very good point.
But also, that one I feel like is a weird one in that I feel like the dynamic, like every time I rewatch it, I feel like that dynamic gets less healthy.
Yes.
Every time I watch it, I feel like Sherlock is afraid of her in that, in a way that rings true to me, in a way that I wish it didn't, you know?
It's a powerful dynamic, but it's got nothing to do with the short story.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
I mean, in the short story, it's they never speak to each other outside of disguise.
Yeah.
They never speak to each other as Irene Adler speaking to Sherlock Holmes.
I was going to say, like, because I hadn't read this story, but I've watched the adaptations, and so the adaptations make it seem like that it is a romantic love interest.
Not at all.
But the only thing in the story, it just says at the start, to Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. And all these people have just gone, well, that clearly means that they're in love with each other.
Whereas the fourth sentence of the story is that he isn't in love with her.
It's intellectual. It's intellectual, like, friendship and, like, and acknowledging that they have this same intellectual capacity for outwitting each other. But
which, again, I think is so hilarious because, like, she's not even trying.
It's not even a thing to her.
So for him to be like, I'm going to put this woman on a pedestal, it's like, buddy.
You know, but for her it was Tuesday, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's going to be thinking about how she outwitted him forever. And she's just like, lol, bye.
And she was like, oh yeah, that was that slight hiccup while I was marrying my husband. Mind you, having said that also, that they never speak to each other out of disguise.
Mm-hmm.
He is the witness for her marriage.
I love that.
Which I love. And I love how much he loves it.
Because he's tailing her and her husband, and they're rushing to the church to get married in the nick of time because of some reason that I think isn't really fully explained. and they need a witness, and because he's been tailing them, he's there, and they're just like, great, come and be our witness.
Yeah.
And it's really funny.
And he thinks it's hilarious.
And when you think about the fact that then she is adapted into a love interest for him, and her husband is just completely written out of basically every adaptation.
Yeah.
It's really strange, and it shows just a really heteronormative approach to the story.
You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of Kirk Drift and how we've maybe misnamed it. Because it's a really similar effect of people later on reading it as something very sexy, very... Like, it's based in romance, it's based in sex, she's a femme fatale. And people do the same thing to Kirk, they do it to Black Widow. There's this whole thing about turning somebody who wasn't originally even that much of a playboy or a femme fatale into... This is the only interpretation that makes sense. And it's such a flattening, boring way of doing things.
And it's so sad because it also just undermines the thing that, men and women can just be friends as a concept.
Yeah, the personal connection of it.
It just undercuts the fact that they could be outwitting each other, quote unquote, but it's friendship. They're not, and I don't understand how someone could read love in this story. It's so short. It's just like, how can you read the, by the way, they're totally gonna do it. Like, no, you can't. It's just no.
Like they've spoken 3 times.
I mean, it's like almost a Disney film. Like, spoke 3 times, fallen in love, sorted. It's just no.
And it's really hilarious to me that everybody seems to read the fact that she's the woman to him. And like, I think the way Watson talks about it makes it really clear that it's not about, it is an intellectual thing. She made him realize that women were people who had brains, and that's really important. And everybody's like, oh, being the woman can only mean
romantic.
That he has a crush on her.
At the end of the book, there's a bit where Watson is saying that Holmes had often been one to make merry about women's intellect, sort of like, haha, aren't women stupid? Yeah. But I've not heard him do it of late. She knocked some sense into him by just being herself and being smart. And, even just the small amount of interaction that they have, that ships passing in the night, basically, it leaves enough of an impression on him that he recognises that she's had that impact, and so, explicitly says, interacting with this person changed me.
Yeah, and that it's something that it's important for him to remember.
And I think that it's, for people for whom women, people making adaptations, if they have the view in their head that women can only be interesting as objects of romantic intent, then obviously they're going to parse it in that light. But I think it does the character and the story a real disservice.
And especially at the end, when it says, the final line is, it was always under the honourable title of the woman. It's like, she has gained this honour of showing him that, women actually have intellectual capacity.
He learned something from her, and that's not common for Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, I just can't understand how you can read this as a romantic interest in any way, shape or form. It just isn't there. It's not there. Sherlock and Watson, you can read that. That is there. He just bodies over there for 4 days. But I'm sorry, you can't read Ireen Adler. Oh, sorry, it just really annoys me.
And in the adaptations, I mean, I want to say that I don't want to spoil the way that Elementary handles Ireen Adler's character, because I think it's brilliant and
it's so good.
It deserves to be watched unspoiled if you are ever going to watch that show, which I also thoroughly recommend.
Yeah.
But in the BBC Sherlock adaptation,
Ugh.
that pretty much sums it up. But for those who haven't seen it,
we can yell about it.
So something I was reading the TV tropes page for Sherlock Holmes, because there isn't a specific one for the Scandal in Bohemia, and they note that back in the day, being an opera singer and an actress would quite often be stand-ins or euphemisms for being a sex worker of one kind.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that the King of Bohemia has a history with somebody who is known as being part of that world, or is presumed to have been part of that world, is far more scandalous than it would be for, Prince Harry to have gone on a date with an opera singer in today's world.
Yeah.
And so the BBC adaptation of Sherlock has her be a lesbian dominatrix, which I'm completely pro-sex work and pro-sex workers' rights, and so I don't mean to imply that it's sort of doing queer folk a disservice to compare them to sex workers, also because sex workers are often, they're disproportionately queer as well. But the fact that the shock value is sort of like, she's gay, and a dominatrix. I mean, I feel like it does a disservice to all of those things, those industries, and to be queer, to be sort of using it as almost a punchline.
It's using it as a prop point, and like the first time you meet her, she's not wearing any clothes, and it's like, well, and it's done in such a oh my god, she's not wearing any clothes. Whereas actually most people just can just like pop a sheet on, please. Like it's shot in such a way that is
but Sherlock can't do that, because then he'd be caving to social norms, and he doesn't do that because he's special, because the BBC adaptation of Sherlock is an insufferable douchebag. But
but like one of the things I really dislike about the use of Ireen Adler as a character in that, and I think the choice to make her a sex worker is potentially a valid one, given the fact that was a common thing for like opera singers, actresses, etc. But the fact that they only seem to use that because it will make their very sexless, possibly virginal Sherlock Holmes really uncomfortable. And it doesn't feel kind.
No, it's not kind.
No. It feels very like, let's take the piss out of Sherlock for being, asexual or virginal or however you want, inexperienced, embarrassed, whatever. It feels like it's literally just there to prod at that aspect of his character in a way that feels... it's just unkind. It feels unkind.
Something else that occurs to me as well is that the show thoroughly misrepresents kink in that scene as well, because she is bringing him into a sexual experience of, her being naked in a very provocative way, which is one of the core things about, non-normative sex, is that it's very clear that you need consent from all, as for any kind of sexual contact, you need consent from all involved, and you need consent from all involved in order to include them in your kink in whatever way, which is why, which is why kinks like voyeurism are, you need to have consent from the person that you want to be your voyeur or whatever. And in that scene, she very much does not have his consent, and it's played for laughs.
It's just a prop.
No, that's very true.
So it's a real disrespect to that character choice to her,
Yeah.
When I watched Elementary, I feel the relationship between Holmes and Watson is much more sort of they complement each other. Like Holmes is sort of sort of genius in solving these crimes, and Watson going, okay, cool, you've got a tortoise, that's fine. Like we'll just it is sort of complementing each other in that friendship and not taking the piss out of their friendship. It's saying people are different.
Yes, which is something that the BBC one just never manages.
Yeah. It's all, oh, ho, ho, how could Watson put up with somebody like this?
Yeah.
Which is just, it's a very shallow reading.
It's a very shallow reading. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, I have a couple of things re Ireen Adler again in the BBC adaptation.
We're not done there,
we're never going to be done there. But firstly, the fact that in every adaptation that I have seen, actually I won't spoil it, but like every adaptation that I've seen, even ones I like, Ireen Adler has been played as a criminal mastermind. And
she's been linked to Moriarty in some way.
Yeah. Pretty much always. And it's like, buddy.
That's just completely different character.
I'm saying that a lot this podcast, but like the sentiment stands. She's just a person living her life. Okay? And that's what makes it cool.
Yeah, she's an ordinary person.
That's what makes it interesting and funny, and that's what makes it have such a big impact on Sherlock. And much as I love a very attractive, sexy criminal mastermind woman, you're missing the point. You're missing the point.
It's kind of like everyone's going, oh, this must be in the book because this is how it's been adapted so many times before. So it must be in there. And in fact, it's just not there.
Yeah. It's not there at all.
Also, Ireen Adler wins.
Yeah.
Ireen Adler wins. That is, and I've yet to see an adaptation that doesn't even, like, if she wins, she only wins temporarily. And then again, her relationship with Sherlock in the BBC one is played as a weakness. It's played as embarrassing. It's played as...
Well, yeah, because they have her be a lesbian so that it's, extra sort of risque and freaky because, obviously women only can exist only for the consumption by men, right? So lesbians are inherently threatening to that paradigm. And then to have her fall in love with Sherlock. and have that be played as this incredible weakness. And, like, let's just leave aside the completely unrealistic prospect of anyone falling in love with the Sherlock in the BBC adaptation, because he is, again, insufferable douchebag. But for her to have been like, I'm a lesbian, and then for her entire character to essentially have been reduced at one point in the story to a person who is in love with Sherlock is just, I mean, as a queer person, I find it incredibly insulting.
Yeah.
And it, again, completely misses the point, because, as we've discussed, we have this asymmetrical relationship in the short story where, for her, it was Tuesday, and Sherlock is far more impacted by her than she is by him.
Yeah.
And then in the BBC adaptation, they flip it and have, I think, a much more boring story where she's hopelessly in love with him and he doesn't care.
Yeah. And it's unkind.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other. It's the mirror image of the first scene with her and Sherlock, where it's just this deeply cruel thing to do, and like it's this horrible exposure that makes me feel really uncomfortable.
I was gonna say, you guys, like, what if you had to adapt it in the future? Like, personally, I would love to see like a Sherlock Holmes, but it's from Ireen Adler's point of view.
Yes!
That would be very funny.
So, I don't know if you guys ever saw the episode of Buffy where Xander, the, like, supposedly comic relief, I hate him, but that's a whole other, thing, my dude.
That's a whole other podcast.
But, like, he's the useless one, right? He's the fun, he's the funny, he's the sarcastic sidekick type who, you know, he's helpful, but he's not, you know, he doesn't have a huge number of skills that are useful to the gang, right? And they have this episode where he has to solve a Monster of the Week problem all by himself. And every now and again, he crosses paths with the rest of the characters while they're having some, like, horrifying noodle incident, you know, like they're getting their heads chewed off by sharks or whatever. And to them, it looks like he's not doing anything. When actually the whole episode is just him solving this problem on his own. And I want the Irene Adler episode to be that. I want her to be just going around her, like, about her business, normally, completely. And every now and again in the background of a frame, we see Sherlock Holmes making a complete tit of himself.
And it'd be such a more interesting story.
Like, that's my dream.
But that really is true to the story, because that's what he does. That's what happens.
Yeah.
He's clowning.
He blows his cover and she gets away.
Yeah.
He fails to fulfill the contract that his client has presented to him. And as it happens, it's fine, because the King of Bohemia ends up going, well, she's married to this other man, and so she's basically never going to blackmail me because it would be just as harmful to her. Because he assumes that her husband would be just as judgy. Although, to be fair, in terms of indiscretion in the past relationship, it's a far worse look for her to have been involved with him, for him to be involved with her, because he's a dick, and she should have had better taste. But there's this lovely line in the letter that she leaves saying, you know, there's no need for him to be worried. I love and am loved by a better man than he. And it's just like
absolute burn.
The shade. But also the complete security of that, where she's just like, I don't care about any of this. I've got what I want, and, you know, I'll leave you to your weird little dramas. Bye.
It's like he's creating his own drama triangle by himself because he's turned up in this mask going, it's not me. Ooh. And then Charlotte's like, no, it is you. And he goes, oh, shit, I better take my mask off.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah.
It's very funny.
And then just goes on like, oh, she's got this photo. She might ruin me. I'm like, well, have you maybe considered that, you know, like from her point of view? And that's why I'd love to see an adaptation from her point of view and go into, you know, why she felt the need to keep this photo. I think that'd be such an interesting thing to explore. It's like, why does she need to have this photo?
Yeah, because what kind of person is he that she felt that she needed to do that?
Well, somebody who has already hired men to stop and search her at least twice. That's brought up, is that they've seized her luggage while she's been travelling, they have stopped and searched her. Like, she is being harassed by this man in pursuit of this photograph that she, at the point that the story is set, is probably holding on to more out of spite than anything for what he's put her through.
Yeah.
And he really, really does, the King of Bohemia really, really does not come across well in the story, and by the end, Holmes and Watson have come around to that point of view as well, in that they think that their client is actually not the victim in this scenario.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I think Holmes doesn't think much of him to start with.
No,
but, like,
that's fair.
But he doesn't think much of many people, so...
I don't know if you guys noticed, when he was talking about the language of the lesson, how do you know it was German? And it was just like the unreasonable position of the verbs or something like that.
Oh yeah, it's like only a German is so uncourteous to his verbs. I love
Loved
that.
it, yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, that's true, because you don't know what the verb is until you get to the end of the sentence.
Yeah. That's tripped me up on Duolingo
Oh.
so many times this week.
That is just on the heels of him having deduced that the paper is based in a very specific town in Bohemia. And I was reading this chain of deductions that he makes, and it's so tenuous. And I was just reminded of that Terry Pratchett quote
Yes.
about how clues are just nonsense. It's like, oh, you might very well deduce that it's a sailor who's recently been put out of a job or something, and it's like actually it's somebody who got a drunken tattoo on one night out and has recently been painting and wore his second best clothes because he didn't want to get them dirty or something. You know, it's
I think that there's a line at the end of it, like, this is Vimes, the Discworld's main police person, going on a rant about clues. And he goes on several rants about clues, but like this one ends with like a line about like what an insult to the rich variety of the human experience. And that really stuck with me. And like it's something that I can't help but think of when I read Sherlock Holmes now. It's just every time I'm a bit like, buddy.
And it's very much a dig at those stories and exactly that kind of tenuous link of deduction that is in this story and as in many other Holmes stories. And you rarely see him be wrong, actually. And that's one of the things that I think Elementary does do every now and then.
Yeah, he is wrong. And it's such a convenient plot device. It's just he just knows everything by looking at your shoe. And it becomes, could you say her Sherlock is, I say Mary Sue character in the sense of he is, I don't know what the correct word is, but he's
overpowered.
But so overpowered, he's infallible. And I think that's what the things that makes everybody human is people are not infallible. They have flaws, and Sherlock can just do no wrong. He can go and commit some crime and everyone's just completely chill with it and go and stalk this random woman trying to get married and everybody's just chill with it. It's just...
In the larger canon, he does make mistakes.
Yeah, I think in the books he does make mistakes.
There's a story called The Yellow Face, which is about... I forget the specifics, but essentially he sees somebody in a mask at a window and he's trying to figure out who the identity of this person is, and he thinks that it is this woman... So it revolves around the character of this woman who had a first husband and the husband died and now she's remarried. And Sherlock Holmes thinks that the first husband didn't die and she's hiding him away. And, goes to great lengths to try and discredit this poor woman because that's what he perceives the events to be. But actually what's happening is she's trying to hide and keep safe her mixed-race daughter from that marriage. So he's very wrong about what's happening and he's misjudged the characters of all involved. And he almost does incredible harm to the people in the story because of it. And at the end, he says to Watson, if ever you think that I am, if ever you think that I'm wrong or that I'm putting too much stock in my own abilities, simply whisper the word Norbury in my ear, and I shall be, I shall be most grateful.
Yeah.
So they've got basically a safe word that he has to set up to rely on Watson to tell him when he is getting too ahead of himself and thinking too much of himself. So that is addressed in the stories, but only not, it's not a major theme, certainly.
It's something that doesn't make it into all adaptations.
Well, it's not interesting, is it? I think it's very interesting, but it
I
doesn't
be very interesting, yeah.
It doesn't make him, it doesn't contribute to the cool, aloof persona,
Yeah. It's not dramatic enough.
Yeah, but I mean, that's one of the things I love about Elementary is that Sherlock is frequently wrong and it frequently harms him and the people around him. And you get to see how he as a character deals with that.
Yeah, it sort of dismantles this idea of Sherlock as the hero and he's solving all this crime. And it's going, no, actually, Watson needs to keep him in check because he does go off on his trail of thought and get it wrong, and that will harm people, and he might not realise it harms people. And so again,
or as there is in one episode of Elementary where he is correct, but the way he goes about dealing with it is so, he puts his foot in his mouth, he offends people, he breaks the law in pursuit of the evidence he needs to put somebody away, and as a result of all of these indiscretions that he commits during the course of this, somebody very close to him gets very, very badly hurt and almost has his career ended. And the show really deals with that and what that means and how he has failed not as a detective because he, this was the outcome of his actions, not in his deductive skills, but in everything else surrounding it.
Yeah. the compassion aspect.
Yeah, but also the understanding what is appropriate and what will, what the consequences. It's not enough to just be right.
Yeah, and it's something that I think is the limit of detective fiction often, is no matter how... I think that's an extreme case, but it touches on something that I see a lot in British detective dramas more, I think. But the idea that actually, while it's important, it's holding as a central premise that it's important to find murderers and find criminals and, get to the truth of horrible traumas that people have suffered, potentially. But that you can also do incredible harm by just by digging that stuff up. Even if you're polite, even if you're compassionate, even if you're nice, in order to get at the truth, people's lives get torn up, and that has consequences. And I think that's something that sequence in Elementary showcases really well, although it is intended, it's definitely going, Sherlock did things wrong in this that resulted in these consequences, but it's an extreme case of the normal process of investigation, People's lives get torn up. People who get questioned by the police are going to find that their work life and their home life and their relationships are impacted by that, even if it turns out that they're innocent.
There's a line in Elementary where Sherlock basically is trying to explain himself and how he views the world to Watson fairly early on in their relationship, and he says, I see people like puzzles, and people don't always like being solved. And it's this admission from him that the way that he views things isn't always helpful, isn't always kind to people.
Yeah. Well, it's people as things, isn't it? It's a fairly mild form, but it is still people as things, which, as we know from Pratchett, is the only sin, really, that exists.
Yeah, or it's how all sins get started. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this story is an example, though far milder than the episode of Elementary we've been discussing, where he basically takes on this case for the money and for the challenge, and it doesn't quite register with him until probably the end of the story that he's almost really damaged the life of somebody who really just didn't deserve it and was trying to do her best. And it's kind of also speaks to his not a very flattering idea about his character. It's just that he only really cares because she was able to outsmart him, and that he wouldn't have had as much sympathy and he wouldn't have had as much respect if she hadn't been able to, if she hadn't had this very specific kind of intellect in that specific moment.
Yeah.
And, it is implied that he comes away from this incident with more empathy and more respect, in particular for women.
I was going to say, just in general, the law around Sherlock, what I found, maybe a lot of people know this, I didn't personally, is the fact that Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock because he got so fed up of writing him and then had to bring him back from the dead because everybody was so sad. And there were all these Victorians.
People were accosting him in the street. People were wearing mourning in London.
I know, they were wearing mourning bands for this fake character. And I was just, when you think of that time, it must be, there's not exactly much else to do for entertainment. So you're going to read a exciting story and try and work out what the puzzle is. Yeah, it just seems quite funny. I think it also shows just the impact that these stories had at the time, these short stories I read somewhere, it's like one of the first uses of a short story as a continuous storytelling device. Can't think of the right word.
Yeah, like a continuous canon, a body of work that keeps growing.
Yeah, it just made me chuckle that everyone's sort of wearing armbands and just mourning this death of this character, which, to be fair, I feel it's sort of similar to when you're watching TV now, or, you're watching it and a series ends and you're just going, what the hell? I didn't think this was ending.
It reminds me of when Ned Stark died in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And the public, the social media outcry. Spoilers for Game of Thrones, by the way, Ned Stark dies in season 1.
I mean, it's Sean Bean. He's...
Yeah, if you didn't know that from it just being Sean Bean,
Hey, he survived Troy!
That is
he
true,
survived the movie Troy.
He survived Troy.
What do we say to the god of death? Sean Bean is that way.
But yeah, I mean, Sherlock Holmes was one of the first well-known pop culture icons. And you can see the impact of those stories throughout the canon of, detective, spy, thriller work since it worked.
Speaking of that, so that's always really interesting to me because there's But fun bit of intertextuality for you. There's a Edgar Allan Poe short story that incidentally apparently makes Poe scholars really mad because in all caps, we do not talk about the orangutan. But it's a short murder mystery. It's set in Paris, and the detective has basically Sherlock Holmes powers, right? He has the deductive reasoning. But it's like it's extreme. If you read it after you've read Sherlock Holmes, you're like, this guy is taking the piss, right? This guy is taking the piss. Like, he's literally reading his companion's mind from, like, the way his eyes fall on cobblestones and shit. And it's just this really... It feels like it has to be satire, right? And I never actually went and looked and saw whether that was written before or after Sherlock Holmes. But the hilarious thing is that the very first chapter of A Study in Scarlet, Holmes has a tantrum because there's a guy in Paris, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, who claims to be using his methods and is nothing more than an overdramatic charlatan. And I can't help but wonder if that was a dig at Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, Study in Scarlet was the first story.
Well, it's the first novel. It's not the first one that got written.
Oh, of course, yes.
So, like, he branched out to novels, but I don't think it was the first thing that was published.
I have a copy of Study in Scarlet signed by Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss from back when I still liked BBC Sherlock and I went to a book signing. And I think it's still at my parents' house, actually. I don't think I brought it with me when I came to university. Not one of my most treasured possessions, if you can believe it.
You just have it. It's there. It exists.
Oh, I'll sell it someday. I'll sell it for zillions.
If you had a Marie Kondo clear out, it would not bring you joy.
No, it would not. It would not. It would probably spark joy to somebody who found it at a charity shop, though, so I might do that. But,
yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, of all of the sins that the BBC adaptation committed, I think some of their greatest were against the character of Ireen Adler.
Yeah.
So if we're going with who should you fight, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss.
Stephen Moffat.
Oh god,
yes.
Yeah. It's just like let them just write one episode, Weeping Angels and Doctor Who, just one episode, and leave the rest alone. One standalone episode.
Hey, Empty Child was pretty good as well.
Yeah. So, Empty Child, Weeping Angels, I feel as a standalone episode, they're really good. And I remember thinking so excited when they're taking over Doctor Who, and then I just got incredibly confused by the story. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm enjoying this as a teenager, how are like younger children going to understand what the hell is going on?
Oh, they're not. But Stephen Moffat gets to feel really smart when he lays his head down to sleep at night. So
and it's, I don't know if you ever watched like any of the Dracula adaptation.
No, I wouldn't subject myself to it. We are doing Dracula in a couple of weeks, so...
I tried to watch it. When it came out, I was like, oh, this will be good. And I was like, oh...
Oh, no, it wasn't.
Because what killed it for me with Sherlock was that Christmas episode where it was all in the past and it was all a dream and he woke up.
I didn't make it that far. I stopped before then.
Make it that far.
Seriously, I remember all my family were just sitting there. We were watching it going, oh, we're excited about the Christmas episode. And then at the end, we're going, right, we're never watching this again because it is exactly the same as when you're writing a story for creative writing when you're 10 and you write at the end and he woke up and it was all a dream, or they all went home for tea, and there's just endings that the teachers say never use. It is exactly that.
Yeah.
Rant over. So I would fight Stephen Moffat and just say, look, just write standalone things, please. Just stop thinking you can do literature.
As for characters in the short story, I would fight the King of Bohemia. A, because I might get to be the King of Bohemia if I kill him, and B, because he's a dick.
Yeah, that's definitely how that works.
And C, because he has awful fashion taste. There's like an entire paragraph talking about his ostentatious, like, over the top. So, like, there's I think they just said it was these fashions would in England be regarded as rich beyond taste or something, and I'm just like, sounds like it. Yeah. Maybe that's the being English for my sins. Maybe that's the English in me thinking that this sounds rich beyond taste. But my God, he sounds like a walking fashion disaster.
You can fight him for crimes against fashion. I'd be down with that.
Yeah.
Would that count in Gothmod's review in the fact there is a lot of crime, but also crimes against fashion?
I don't think the cat has a concept of fashion.
She does. She wears pantaloons. She has very fluffy pantaloons.
That's true.
So she's into the ostentatious rich people weirdery.
I think her primary measure of the goodness of a piece of fabric is how good is it to sink her little claws into and scritch and scratch at it.
I think she'd enjoy stabbing the King of Bohemia.
Yeah, I think that would provide some good enrichment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the cat would give this story quite a high rating.
I was going to say, there aren't any actual cats, but at several points, the way they were describing Sherlock made me think, oh, he's just a cat. He's a cat, right? There's a whole, like, section where he's just, like, the guy is telling him this, like, tragic tale of woe, and he just shuts his eyes, and the guy's like, are you listening? And Sherlock, like, opens one eye really slowly, is like, well, tell me your stupid story then. And, like, it's just he behaves in several instances very like a cat.
Yep.
So I think there are actual crimes in this one, and Sherlock Holmes may be a cat. I think in those instances, we have to give it a fairly high Gothmog rating.
I agree.
8 out of 10? 9 out of 10? 10 out of 10.
Ooh, no, I wouldn't go as far as 10. There are no real cats.
8.5.
8.5.
Yep, I'll stand by that.
For crimes and also a narratively satisfying ending that doesn't end up punishing the woman who just had an ill-judged fling with a member of royal family and ended up paying for it later.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we were all punished for our terrible exes, what a world this would be.
Yeah. And Ireen Adler should not suffer any more than anyone else for those ill-judged dalliances.
Yep.
So yeah, I think Gothmog would give that an 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
So that was Scandal in Bohemia. Next week we're going to be talking about the book Sabriel by Garth Nix, which is the first in the Old Kingdom series, which was originally a trilogy and has since been expanded. And I'm very much looking forward to rereading that, because it's a book that I've read a few times and really, really enjoyed.
I think it's going to be the first one that we've read that has an actual cat in
That
it.
is true.
It does. It does. Are there other things that you folks have been reading over the last couple of weeks that you want to talk about?
I've been listening to Mythos by Stephen Fry, mainly because I've been playing too much Assassin's Creed Odyssey and wanted some background/context to all the gods, because I can't remember who they all are. And so that's quite nice. If I recommend if you've got a audiobook account or you subscribe to audiobooks. It's quite a nice relaxing one because it's not Harry Potter, but it's the same person who read Harry Potter when you were a child, so it's quite good to listen to.
Fair enough.
Soothing.
I've been on a bit of a horror binge lately, and so I actually reread recently I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is not for the faint of heart, but
Which
it is
one of the best titles, though. That's such an incredible title. I love it.
Yeah, it's become iconic.
It's so dramatic.
So short story by Harlan Ellison that is a look at what might happen. It's a look at the dangers of AI, sort of. It's probably one of the first really famous what if AI was evil, actually.
Yeah.
But also kind of it's humans' fault because of the Cold War. And I really like that. It's a classic, but yeah, very much not for the faint of heart.
Oh, I finished Death Republic by Ilya Kaminsky, which I really, really enjoyed. I had to put it down and then like go away and cry for like half an hour.
That's a good book.
Like
yep.
Lots of feelings. And I really liked I didn't realise this when I bought it, actually. I just read the first poem in it, and I really, really liked it. The We Lived Happily During the War. Mm-hmm. It floats around on Tumblr sometimes. Like, go look it up. It's really good. And I kind of assumed that it was an anthology in the traditional sense of, it's a collection of poems. Presumably they're related to each other in some way, but it's more sort of thematic than anything else. And it's actually a narrative told in a collection of poems about a town that is occupied by an invading army, essentially, and sort of about resistance and about not resisting and about the ways in which people are silenced and silence themselves. And it's really, I'm going to have to read it again. I enjoyed it a lot. There's a lot of really beautiful imagery in it. And then, the bookend poem, so We Lived Happily During the War, and I can't remember what the last one is called, but both of those are very clearly set in actual real America as opposed to fictional Eastern European town invaded by unknown force. And it just it hit really hard. And I think it's worth reading. Go read. You will cry, but it's worth it.
So I guess, yes, thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please like, subscribe and review. Add us on all the socials. We have an email. Feel free to ping us an email. Just put the subject line hello there so we know you're not spam. So say...
And potentially that you're Obi-Wan Kenobi trying to flirt with us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's fine. As long as we know you're not just some spam email. So say hello, send us a message, and recommend some books to us to read, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.